The fog came in off the river, the colour of old pewter, and I had 3 streets to cross before it swallowed Gracechurch entirely. And I had a child by the hand who would not stop pointing. "Aunt Caroline." "I see him, love. Keep walking." "He's bleeding." "I know." "He's blind, Aunt Caroline." I knew that too. I had known it from the moment the man stepped down from his carriage on the corner of Lombard Street and waved his driver off with the flat of his hand, the way a man waves off a dog he no longer trusts. I had watched him take 6 paces into the fog before the cane caught a paving stone and turned in his grip. And I had watched him keep walking, because a man like that does not stop in the middle of the street to attend to a cane. Not when there are people who might see. By the time I reached the corner, he had collided with a coal porter's barrow and opened a cut above his eyebrow on the iron rim of it. And the porter had cursed him for a drunk and gone on, and the Duke of Ashworth, for I knew already that this was the Duke of Ashworth, the whole of London had been speaking of nothing else for a year and a half, stood in the gutter with blood running into his collar and a hand pressed against a lamppost he could not see. Lottie pulled on my hand. "Aunt Caroline," she said, "we have to." We did. I knew we did. There was a particular kind of arithmetic that operated in my head in those days. The arithmetic of a woman with £80 a year and a 6-year-old niece and a dead husband's pension that arrived late twice running. And the arithmetic told me that walking up to a duke in the public street was the act of a fool. There was no introduction. There was no chaperone. There was a child in a brown wool coat and a woman in mourning grey. And there was His Grace bleeding into Gracechurch Street. And the only thing more ruinous than being seen with him was leaving him there. I let go of Lottie's hand. She did not wait for me. She crossed the cobbles at a run, the way only a child of 6 can run in fog. And she stopped 2 paces from him and waited, the way I had taught her to wait when she addressed an adult she did not know. "Sir," she said. His head came up. "I've got you," Lottie said. He stood very still. Blood ran from his eyebrow down into the wool of his greatcoat, and his hand on the lamppost was the only thing holding him. And a small girl in a brown coat was standing in front of him in the street, and he was deciding what to do. "You have me," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Have you indeed?" "I'm Lottie." "Lottie." "And my aunt is coming. She's behind me. She walks slower than I do." I reached them. I had not, in fact, walked slowly. I had walked deliberately, because I had needed the 3 additional seconds to decide what I would say. "Your Grace," I said. His face turned half an inch toward my voice. I had been right. He had not wanted to be recognized in the street, and now he had been. And there was a moment in which I watched a man who could not see arrange his expression for an audience he could not place. He did it very well. The Duke of Ashworth had been 6 years a soldier and 18 months a blind man, and he had not, in either capacity, learned how to be pitied. "Madam," he said, "my niece is correct. You are bleeding. It is nothing. Your Grace, it is running into your shirt." I had not meant to be sharp. I had meant to be careful and useful, and to disappear from the encounter the moment he had a handkerchief and a direction and a hand on a railing. But there was something in the set of his jaw that was deciding to send us away. And I knew. I knew the way I knew the rent on the rooms in Cheapside and the precise cost of a £1/4 of tea. That if he sent us away, he would be on his knees in the gutter within the quarter hour. And the next person along Lombard Street might not be a woman with a clean handkerchief, and a small girl who did not flinch from blood. I took the handkerchief from my reticule. I took his hand off the lamppost and put it on Lottie's shoulder, because Lottie had stood squarely against his leg already and was bracing him with the entire 7 stone of her small body. And the audacity of it, a child propping up a duke, was the only thing that prevented me from doing something worse, which was to lift my own hand to his face. I pressed the handkerchief against the cut. He made a sound. It was not pain. "Sir," Lottie said, "Aunt Caroline's going to clean you up." "Is she? And then we'll take you home." "Will you? Where do you live, sir?" There was a silence in which the fog moved past us in the colour of pewter, and the Duke of Ashworth stood in Gracechurch Street with my handkerchief pressed to his eyebrow and a child's shoulder under his hand, and decided whether to answer a 6-year-old. "Berkeley Square," he said. "That's far." "It is." "We'll get you a hackney." "Will you?" he said again. And this time there was something in it that was not surrender, and was not amusement, but was a third thing I had no name for then. I have a name for it now. It was the first time in 18 months that anyone had told him what was going to happen next without first asking his permission. I raised my hand for a hackney. One came. The driver took one look at the blood on the Duke's collar and one look at me in my grey wool and refused to take us until I produced the silver from my reticule and put it into his hand and named the address myself, because the Duke of Ashworth, for reasons I did not yet understand, did not want to name it in the street. I handed Lottie up. I handed His Grace up after her, his hand on my elbow because I had put it there, and the driver shut the door, and the fog closed around the windows the colour of pewter, and we rolled out of Gracechurch Street towards Berkeley Square, with a duke and a child, and a widow, and one bloodied handkerchief between the 3 of us. He did not speak for the first half-mile. Lottie sat beside him on the seat. She had taken his left hand into both of hers, and was holding it the way she held mine in the dark, which is to say with the absolute confidence of a child who has never been told her touch was unwelcome. The Duke did not pull his hand away. I watched him not pull it away, and understood that he could not remember the last time anyone had touched him without first ringing a bell. "Madam," he said, at Cheapside. "Yes?" "Your name?" "Mrs. Whitcombe. Caroline Whitcombe." "Whitcombe. My late husband was Lieutenant Edward Whitcombe, of the 44th. He fell at Quatre Bras." A pause. "I am sorry," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace. Quatre Bras was a bad business." "Yes." "I was at Waterloo 2 days later." "Yes." He did not say, "And that is where I lost my sight," because he did not need to, and because a man like the Duke of Ashworth did not narrate his own wounds to a stranger in a hackney. But I understood, in that moment, that he had said it to me anyway. He had given me the date. He had given me the place. He had given me, in exchange for my husband's name, the place where he had stopped being the man my husband would have recognized. I have thought about that exchange many times since. I think it was the moment he decided, on no evidence at all, that I was a person he could speak to. "Your Grace," I said. "Mrs. Whitcombe, why were you walking alone in Gracechurch Street?" The carriage rocked. He turned his face toward the window he could not see out of. "I had a meeting," he said, "with my solicitor." "In Gracechurch Street?" "In Gracechurch Street." "Your Grace, your solicitor is in Lincoln's Inn. Everyone's solicitor is in Lincoln's Inn." He laughed. It was not a sound I had expected. It was short and dry, and it ended too quickly. And it was the first laugh that had come out of him in some time, and he was as surprised by it as I was. "You are very direct, Mrs. Whitcombe." "I am a widow, Your Grace, with a niece to keep. Directness is the only economy I can afford." "It is a good economy." "Why were you in Gracechurch Street?" He was silent for a long time. The hackney turned into Cheapside proper, and the noise of the street pressed against the window, and Lottie was still holding his hand, and the silver watch in his waistcoat ticked. And I waited. "I was meeting a man," the Duke said at last, "who is not my solicitor. Who is, in fact, a person my solicitor would prevent me from meeting, if my solicitor knew. I am attempting to discover what has been happening to my income, Mrs. Whitcombe, and I have reason to believe my solicitor is the person it has been happening to." I sat very still. "How much?" I said. "I beg your pardon." "How much has been happening to it?" "Mrs. Whitcombe, Your Grace, I have just produced a handkerchief and silver for a hackney, and an introduction in the street, and you have given me the date you lost your sight, and we are presently rolling toward Berkeley Square in fog the colour of pewter. We are some distance past the polite questions. How much?" The Duke of Ashworth turned his face toward me. He could not see me. I understood, with a small, clean shock, that he had been turning his face toward the voices of the people he spoke to for 18 months, because that was what a sighted man would have done, and that he had stopped doing it in the last 2 minutes and had started again now because he had decided I would notice yet he did not. £6,200, he said, in 18 months. I made a sound. I did not mean to. It was the sound of a woman who had been living on £80 a year, hearing the figure 6,000 spoken aloud as a sum that had merely gone missing. And I could no more have kept it in than I could have kept the fog out of the carriage. "Yes," the Duke said, "just so. Your Grace, forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive. It is a great deal of money. It would buy a great many handkerchiefs." He smiled. It was the second expression I had seen on him in a quarter of an hour, and it was a smile that had cost something. And I made a private decision in the swaying interior of the hackney that I would not, under any circumstances, leave him in Berkeley Square with a cut over his eyebrow and £6,000 bleeding out of his estate, and no one in his house he could trust to look at the books. I had not yet worked out how to manage that decision. The decision had been made anyway. That was the order in which I did things, in those days. The decision first, the mechanism after. We came into Berkeley Square at 3:30. The fog had lifted a little, enough that I saw the house. A great stone front with 3 steps and the black door, and the kind of windows that have not been opened in some time. And I saw, on the 3rd step, a man in a dark coat who turned his face up at the sound of the hackney, and registered, in the order of a man who has been waiting, and is not pleased to be kept waiting, first the carriage, then me, then the Duke. "Adrian," said the man on the step. The Duke's hand tightened on Lottie's. I saw it. "Gregory," said the Duke. "Where the devil have you been?" "Gracechurch Street." "In Gracechurch Street? In fog?" "Yes." "With—" The man's eyes came up to me, and I felt them go over my grey wool and my widow's bonnet and my niece and my reticule, in that order, and I felt him arrive at a private and incorrect conclusion. "With a companion." Mrs. Whitcombe, said the Duke, is the widow of Lieutenant Edward Whitcombe of the 44th. She has rendered me a service. I would like you to thank her. The man on the step did not thank me. Adrian, he said, you are bleeding. I am aware. You have been in the street. I have been in a hackney. Adrian, for God's sake, get inside the house. The Duke turned his face toward me. He did it slowly. He did it, I understood, because Mr. Gregory Ashworth, for I knew now who he was, the cousin, the heir presumptive, the man whose name had been spoken in connection with the Duke's affairs since Waterloo, was watching, and the Duke wanted me to understand precisely what he was about to do. Mrs. Whitcombe, the Duke said, would you and your niece do me the very great kindness of taking tea with me? I find I am not yet ready to be alone. There was a silence on the step. Adrian, said Gregory Ashworth. Cousin, said the Duke. This is highly irregular. It is. Mrs. Whitcombe, will you come in? I do not know, even now, what shape my face wore. I know that Lottie's hand was very small in mine, and that her grip was tight. And I know that I felt the cousin's eyes on me, and felt the cost of every step I was about to take. To go into the Duke of Ashworth's house in Berkeley Square, alone but for a child, on no introduction but a street corner accident, in the sight of a man who would tell the story however he chose, it was the kind of decision that ended a woman of my standing. I had £80 a year. I had a niece whose mother was dying in Kent of a wasting illness, and whose father was buried in Spain. I had no margin. Your Grace, I said, we should be glad to. Adrian, said Gregory Ashworth. The Duke turned his face toward his cousin for the first time. He did it slowly, and he did it with a faint smile. And he did it as a man who could not see his cousin, but knew exactly where his cousin was standing. Gregory, the Duke said, be so good as to ring for tea. The drawing room was the colour of old gold, and had not been arranged for company in some time. I noticed it the way I noticed everything in that house in the first quarter hour. The dust along the picture rail, the unopened correspondence on the side table, the chair drawn up beside a cold grate where the Duke evidently sat alone in the evenings. And I made another private decision, which was that I would not pretend not to see what I saw. The Duke could not see his own house. He had been navigating it for 18 months by memory and by the deliberate misinformation of a household no one was supervising. If I was here at all, I was here as a pair of eyes. Lottie went directly to the cold grate and sat down on the hearthrug as though she had been there before, and Gregory Ashworth, who had followed us into the room and not yet sat, watched her with an expression that informed me he did not care for children. And the Duke stood at the back of his own armchair with his hand on it and waited until I had spoken. Your Grace, I said, may I sit? Please. I sat. The cousin remained standing. The Duke sat. Mrs. Whitcombe, said Gregory Ashworth. Whitcombe, were you not the Whitcombes of Hertfordshire? My husband's family, Mr. Ashworth, were the Whitcombes of nowhere in particular. His grandfather kept a chandlery. Ah, I had said it deliberately. I had said it because I had seen, in the small contraction around his eyes, that he had been preparing to place me in a county I had no claim to. And to pretend I did not understand him would have cost more than to disabuse him at once. The Duke, in his chair, made a sound that was almost a smile. Mrs. Whitcomb's husband, the Duke said, fell at Quatre Bras, 2 days before I was struck down at Waterloo. I find I owe his widow a small attention. a small attention. Tea. Adrian, the woman is a stranger. She is not Gregory. She is the widow of a man who died on the same campaign that took my sight. And she has just pulled me out of Gracechurch Street and dressed my cut, and conveyed me home in a hackney she paid for herself, out of her own reticule. If that is a stranger, I have led a stranger's life until this afternoon. Gregory Ashworth said nothing. A maid came in with tea. She set the tray down. She did not look at the Duke, and I noticed it. I noticed that she set the cups in front of Gregory, not in front of the Duke, as though the Duke were not the man of the house, but a guest in it. And I noticed that Gregory took the teapot up without thinking, as a man does when he is in the habit of pouring for a master who cannot. I watched him pour. I watched him hand the Duke his cup, and I watched the Duke's fingers close on the porcelain, close in the precise place where the handle had to be, because Gregory had positioned it correctly, and there was a long practice between them of this gesture. And I felt something cold move down my spine that had nothing to do with fog. The Duke could not see his cup. He could not see his cousin's hands. He could not see his own books, his own ledgers, his own correspondence. He sat in a room in his own house and was handed his tea by the man who, after his death, would be the Duke. I thought, £6,200 in 18 months. I thought, it has all gone through this room. I drank my tea. I did not look at Mr. Gregory Ashworth, because I could not yet trust my face. "Mrs. Whitcombe," said the Duke. "Your Grace? You said in the carriage that you have a niece to keep. May I ask after your circumstances?" "Adrian," said Gregory. "I am asking Gregory, and the lady will answer if she wishes." I drew a breath. "My sister," I said, "is in Kent, in poor health. Lottie is her daughter. My husband left me a small annuity. I take in a little needlework. I had been a governess before I married, and I have been considering returning to that work. The fact, Your Grace, is that I am not in easy circumstances, and have not been for some time." "I see," said the Duke. I did not believe, then, that he could mean it the way the phrase was usually meant. He did not, at any rate, mean it in the social sense. He meant, in the most precise and literal way available to him, that he had understood what I had told him. He had understood that I had told him the truth about my circumstances when he had asked, and he had understood that I had not done it to invite his pity, and he had understood that whatever he did next would be observed by his cousin and would matter. "Mrs. Whitcombe," said the Duke, "do you read?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Do you read aloud?" "I have been reading aloud to my niece since she was 3, Your Grace, and to my dying sister since November." "Adrian," said Gregory. "And do you keep accounts?" "I keep my own, Your Grace, which are small." "Could you keep larger ones?" "Adrian," said Gregory Ashworth, "stop." The Duke turned his face toward his cousin. He did it slowly. "Mrs. Whitcombe," the Duke said, without turning back to me, "I find I have need, very urgently, of a person who can read my correspondence aloud to me, who can keep my household accounts, and who can do both of these things in a room in which I am the only person to whom the contents of either are reported. I have, I believe, the means to engage such a person. Would you be willing to consider the post?" Gregory Ashworth set down his teacup. He set it down very carefully. "Adrian," he said, "she is a stranger. She has told you, Gregory, that her husband's grandfather kept a chandlery, and you have not since asked her another question about herself, which is to say, you have ceased to consider her of consequence. I find that I have not. Mrs. Whitcombe, Will you do me the kindness of considering the post? I had not, in my life, been offered anything as quickly as that. I had not been offered, in fact, anything at all in some time. I had been refused references and refused positions and refused, on one occasion, the small mercy of a Sunday off. And I had ceased to expect that a door would open and that a man behind it would extend a hand. I thought of Lottie on the hearthrug. I thought of the £80 a year. I thought of the cousin's still face. Your Grace, I said, may I think on it? Of course. May I think on it until tomorrow? You may take any time you wish. I will give you my answer by tomorrow afternoon. The Duke inclined his head. Gregory Ashworth rose. He rose, I noticed, very quickly, the way a man rises when he intends to walk a guest to the door himself and not allow her to walk through any other room of the house. Mrs. Whitcombe, Gregory said, may I see you out? I rose. Lottie rose with me. The Duke rose last, putting his hand on the back of the chair, and he was very still, and he turned his face toward where my voice had been. Mrs. Whitcombe, Your Grace, should you decide against the post, I will of course be glad to have rendered you the smaller service of returning your handkerchief, and the very small kindness of tea. I am, in either case, in your debt. You owe me nothing, Your Grace. I owe you Gracechurch Street. I did not answer him. I could not. I curtsied, which he could not see, and Lottie came and put her small hand into the Duke's and said, Goodbye, sir. And the Duke knelt in his own drawing room, with his blind eyes turned toward the sound of her, and said, Goodbye, Lottie, with a gravity that I will remember when I am old. Gregory Ashworth showed us to the front door himself. He did not speak as we walked down the corridor. At the door, in the marble vestibule, he stopped me with the smallest gesture of his hand. Mrs. Whitcombe, he said. Mr. Ashworth? My cousin, he said, is not a well man. The wound was severe. The recovery has been uneven. He is given of late to impulse. I see. He has, in the past year, made several decisions which his trustees and I have been obliged to undo. It would distress him a great deal, I think, to make another. I looked at him. He was a handsome man. The Ashworths were a handsome family. He had his cousin's height and a paler version of his cousin's face, and where the Duke's eyes were the colour of bitter chocolate, the cousin's were a clear and very cold blue. Mr. Ashworth, I said, do you mean to tell me that the Duke is not in his right mind? I mean to tell you that he is a man of impulse, and that he has just engaged a stranger off the street to handle his correspondence and his accounts. He has not engaged me, Mr. Ashworth. He has offered me a post which I have not yet accepted. And you will not, I hope, accept it. That is for me to decide. Mrs. Whitcombe, Mr. Ashworth, you have just informed me that the Duke of Ashworth is not competent to engage his own staff. That is a serious thing to say. Were you to say it in front of his trustees, you would be obliged to bring evidence. His face did not change. I noticed that it did not change, and I noticed it the way I had noticed the maid setting his tea before the Duke's. And I understood that I had just told Mr. Gregory Ashworth that I had heard him, and that he had heard me hearing him, and that we were, the two of us, no longer pretending. Good day, Mrs. Whitcombe, he said. Good day, Mr. Ashworth. The door closed behind us. Lottie and I stood on the third step in Berkeley Square, and the fog was thinning over the rooftops, and the sky had cleared enough that I could see a single faint sun behind the cloud. And I had the silver pocket watch. I had not meant to take the silver pocket watch. The Duke had set it down on the side table beside his chair when he sat, the way a man sets down a watch he reads by touch. And Lottie, my niece, 6 years old, and the hearthrug, had been looking at it for the full quarter hour we sat in that room. As we rose to leave, she had crossed to the table, lifted it, and put it into my reticule. I had not seen her do it. I had felt the weight when I took up my reticule from beside my chair, and I had not, in the moment, understood what the weight was. And now I stood on the third step in Berkeley Square, with a stolen Duke's watch in my bag, and a child who had stolen it, and a cousin behind me in the house who had just suggested that the Duke could not be trusted to recognize his own correspondence. I took Lottie's hand. I walked her down the steps. I waited until we were around the corner. Lottie? Yes, Aunt Caroline? What is in my reticule? His watch. Lottie, I wanted him to have a reason to send for us. I melt in the street, in my grey wool, in the fog, and I took my niece's face in my hands. Lottie, I said, we cannot take a Duke's watch. But, Aunt Caroline... What? He couldn't see us go. I have, for the rest of my life, been unable to forget the way she said it. I rose. I took her hand. I walked her home to Cheapside through the thinning fog with the Duke of Ashworth silver pocket watch in my reticule. And I did not know yet that the watch had a raised compass face on the back of it that he read with his thumb in the dark, or that it had been his father's, or that he would notice it gone within the hour, or that the noticing of it would be the second decision the Duke of Ashworth made on the afternoon of the 11th of November, 1816, which was that he would send a footman to Cheapside that evening with a note in his own hand, dictated to no one and folded by no one, asking Mrs. Whitcombe, if she would do him the favour, to call again in the morning. I did not know any of that yet. I walked Lottie home. I put her to bed. I sat by the kitchen fire with the Duke's watch in my lap and turned it over in my hands. The compass face was on the back. I felt it before I saw it. The raised brass under my thumb, the 4 cardinal letters set as ridges, the small star where north should be. A blind man's watch. A blind man's watch that he had taught his thumb to read in the dark of his own corridors, when no one was watching, when no one could see him not knowing where he was. I thought, he will know it is gone before the lamps are lit. I thought, he will think his cousin took it. And then, and this was the thought that mattered, the thought that arrived at 4:30 on the 11th of November, with the cold of the kitchen flagstones coming up through my shoes. I thought, Mr. Gregory Ashworth has been taking from him for 18 months, and the household has been letting him. The footman arrived at 6. The note read, in a hand I would come to know as the Duke's own, written before his blindness, and recently retraced by an effort I did not yet understand. Mrs. Whitcombe, I find I have left my watch with you. It was my father's. I should be obliged if you would return it to me yourself, and call upon me at 10 tomorrow. A. The hand was uneven. The downstrokes wavered. I understood, looking at it under the kitchen candle, that he had written it himself, alone, without the assistance of any person in his house. He had not asked his cousin to write it. He had not asked his secretary. He had written it in the failing light of a London afternoon, with his own hand, 18 months out of practice, because the contents of the note were not for any other eye in Berkeley Square to see. I gave my answer to the footman. I called upon him at 10 the next morning. I did not return the watch. I brought it with me. I gave it back into his hand in the drawing-room with the door open, and the cousin not yet arrived for the day, and the Duke closed his fingers around it for a long moment without speaking. And I said, "Your Grace, I will take the post, but I will not take it from your cousin. I will take it from you." He did not move. He held the watch. "Mrs. Whitcombe, Your Grace, you think Gregory is stealing from me? Your Grace, I do not yet think anything. I have eyes, and I have been in your house for 1 hour, and I am the only person who has come into it for some time who is neither in your cousin's pay nor in his service. I propose to read your correspondence to you, and to keep your accounts, and to do both of those things in a room with the door shut, and to report what I find to you, and to no other person in this house. If at the end of a fortnight you do not believe me, I will go. And if at the end of a fortnight I do believe you, then we will decide what to do." He held the watch a moment longer. Then he reached for the chain across his waistcoat, and he hung it where it belonged, and he turned his face toward me. I do not know, but I think, he turned his face toward me with the precise expression a sighted man would have used, as though he had practiced it. As though he had been practicing since 6 o'clock the previous evening, for the moment I came back through his door. "A fortnight," he said. "A fortnight, Your Grace." "And Mrs. Whitcombe?" "Yes. You will, in the meantime, be addressed in this house as Mrs. Whitcombe, and given a room of your own, and a salary appropriate to the work. And I shall arrange this morning for a respectable woman of my acquaintance, Lady Eustacia Marchmont, my late mother's cousin, to take up residence as your chaperone. I will not have you compromised in my house." "Your Grace." "Mrs. Whitcombe." "Yes. I am blind. I am not a fool." There was no answer to that did not unmake me, and so I gave him none, and he heard my silence and inclined his head as though I had answered, and the fortnight began. I will not pretend that what came next did not change me. It changed me from the first morning. The Duke of Ashworth's correspondence had been collected on a salver in the front hall since June of 1815, and it had been opened, every letter, by Mr. Gregory Ashworth, and it had been read aloud to the Duke in selective and incomplete summaries by Mr. Gregory Ashworth, and it had been replied to by Mr. Gregory Ashworth in a hand that was tolerably close to his cousin's pre-injury script. I discovered all of this in the first 3 days. I discovered it by the simple method of asking the second footman in the corridor outside the breakfast room whether the postbag arrived in the morning or the afternoon, and by being told, by a man who had not understood until that moment, that he had been asked a question by a person with the Duke's authority to ask it, that the postbag was carried directly to Mr. Gregory Ashworth's study, and that his Grace's own correspondence had not been laid before him for over a year. I went into the Duke's library and shut the door. "Your Grace, Mrs. Whitcombe, your cousin has been opening your post." "Yes. For how long have you suspected?" "Since August." "And you have done nothing?" The Duke laughed. It was the dry laugh I had first heard in the hackney. He turned his face toward the cold grate. "Mrs. Whitcombe, what would you have me do? I am a blind man in a house staffed by my cousin's appointees. I have, on 3 separate occasions, attempted to engage a man of business of my own choosing. Each time, the man of business has arrived at this house, has been received by my cousin and has departed within the hour with the impression. I do not know how it has been conveyed, but I know precisely that it has. That the Duke of Ashworth is not in a state to engage him. The fourth time I sent for a man myself, in writing, in my own hand, to an address my cousin did not know, and that man was the man I was to meet in Gracechurch Street on the afternoon you found me. He did not come to the meeting. I have, since yesterday afternoon, been waiting to hear whether he is alive. I sat down.
Your Grace.
Yes? You went into Gracechurch Street alone, in fog, because you believed you were being prevented from meeting the only man in London who would tell you what your cousin was doing with your money. Yes. And no one in your household knew where you were going. No one in my household has known anything I did not wish them to know in 14 months, Mrs. Whitcombe. I am blind. I am not without strategy. I sat for a long time. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11. The Duke sat in his chair with his hand on his father's watch and waited for me to speak.
Your Grace, I said. The man you were to meet. His name? Mr. Henry Falconer, of Falconer and Sons, Lincoln's Inn.
Then I shall write to him this afternoon, from my own hand, in my own name, from this house. If he is alive, he will reply. If he is not, his sons will. And I shall do it without your cousin's knowing, because I shall give the letter to the second footman, who I have just discovered is a Whitechapel man and dislikes Mr. Gregory Ashworth on grounds I have not yet inquired into. And the letter shall be carried to Lincoln's Inn in the second footman's coat pocket and given into Mr. Falconer's hand directly. Will you permit me to do this? The Duke turned his face toward me.
Mrs. Whitcombe, he said, very quietly.
Who are you? I am the widow of Lieutenant Edward Whitcombe, Your Grace, and I have been a governess and a needlewoman and an aunt and the keeper of a household on £80 a year, and I have not, in 7 years of widowhood, had a single afternoon in which a person of consequence asked my opinion about anything more substantive than the colour of the sash. I find that I have opinions, Your Grace. I find that I have a great many. So I am discovering. Will you permit the letter? Write the letter. I wrote the letter. It went out in the second footman's coat that afternoon, and on the third morning of the fortnight, Mr. Henry Falconer himself arrived at the back door of the house in Berkeley Square at 7:15, before Mr. Gregory Ashworth was awake and was shown up to the Duke's library by the second footman, and sat with the Duke and with me for 2 hours, with a candle on the table between us, and at 9 o'clock, when the household began to stir, and Mr. Falconer was let out by the back stair the way he had come in, we had the first half of what I would later come to call the Falconer Plan. The Falconer Plan required 4 things. It required the Duke's signature, freely given, on a document of authority, empowering Mr. Falconer to act as his man of business, and to require the household to produce its books. It required a witness to the signing, who could swear to the Duke's competence at the time of the signing. It required the books themselves, 18 months of household accounts, which Mr. Gregory Ashworth had kept in a locked desk in his own study, and which he had never permitted any other person to open. And it required a quiet hour, in a room without Mr.
Gregory Ashworth in it, in which the Duke could be heard out by a person who would not later be told what he had said.
3 of these things I procured in the fortnight. Mr. Falconer brought the document. Lady Eustacia Marchmont, who had arrived at Berkeley Square on the 3rd day with 2 trunks and a small dog, and the unshakable composure of a woman who had been a great beauty in 1782 and had no intention of being treated as anything else now, signed as the witness with a flourish that suggested she had been waiting for the chance. And the quiet hour I gave him myself, every afternoon in the library, with the door shut and the second footman in the corridor. The books were the difficulty. The books were locked in Mr. Gregory Ashworth's study, and Mr. Gregory Ashworth carried the key on his person. And Mr. Gregory Ashworth had, by the 7th day of the fortnight, begun to understand that something in his household had changed. I knew because he had begun to watch me. He had begun to come into the breakfast room when I came in, and to leave when I left. He had begun to stop in the corridor outside the library when I read to the Duke. He had begun, twice, to ask Lady Eustacia in my hearing whether she had observed anything peculiar in Mrs. Whitcomb's conduct toward the Duke. And Lady Eustacia, bless her, I will be grateful to her in my grave, had said only the second time, "Gregory, you have a fly on your collar," and watched him leave the room without one. On the 9th evening of the fortnight, he came into the drawing-room after dinner. I was reading aloud to the Duke from a column of figures Mr. Falconer had supplied, the official record of the Duke's rents, which Mr. Falconer had reconstructed from the tenants themselves over the preceding week. And the Duke was sitting forward in his chair, his hand on his father's watch, listening, and the door opened and Mr. Gregory Ashworth came in. "Adrian?" I closed the column of figures.
Gregory. Adrian, I should like a word.
"Speak." "Adrian, in private. Mrs. Whitcombe is reading to me. I am attending to her. When she is finished, I will hear you." "Adrian, this woman—" "Mrs. Whitcombe. Mrs. Whitcombe is in this house on terms I have not been consulted upon, and the household is being— The household, Gregory, is mine." There was a silence. Lady Eustacia in the corner, working at her tapestry, did not look up. I sat very still with a column of figures in my lap.
Adrian, said Gregory Ashworth, you have been imposed upon.
"Have I? This woman walks into your house, off the street." "She did not walk into my house off the street, Gregory. She walked me into my house off the street. There is a distinction. She has insinuated herself into your confidence. She is reading your private correspondence. She is keeping your accounts. She has installed a chaperone. She has done none of these things, Gregory. I have done these things, and I have done them in the order I chose, and I have done them because I am the Duke of Ashworth, and not, as you appear to have forgotten, a ward of yours." "Mrs. Whitcombe." "Yes, Your Grace." "Please continue with the column." I continued. I read the column of figures aloud, the true rents, the recorded rents, the difference. And Mr. Gregory Ashworth stood in the doorway of the drawing-room and listened. And his face did not change. And when I had finished, the Duke said, "Thank you, Mrs.
Whitcombe, and turned his face toward his cousin. And Mr. Gregory Ashworth, after a moment, turned and walked out of the room without speaking. The Duke waited until the door had shut. "Mrs. Whitcombe." "Yes, Your Grace." "He will move tomorrow." "Yes, Your Grace." "He cannot afford for me to see the books." "No, Your Grace, he cannot." "What will he do?" I thought about it. "He will call the trustees," I said. "He will call them tomorrow morning before you are up, on the grounds that you have engaged a stranger off the street and installed her in your house, and that you have done so in defiance of his counsel, and that you are not in a state to manage your own affairs. He will not, I think, accuse you of madness. He is too clever for that. He will accuse you of impulse. He will say that you must be made to undo what you have done.
And the trustees, who have not seen you in a year and a half, will not know which of the two of you to believe." The Duke was silent a long time.
"Mrs. Whitcombe."
"Yes, Your Grace." "What do I do?" I closed the column of figures. I rose. I went to him, to the chair he sat in, to the man who could not see me cross the room, and I knelt on the rug beside his chair, the way Lottie had knelt by his leg in Gracechurch Street, and I put my hand on the arm of his chair beside his. "Your Grace, stop apologizing. I beg your pardon. You have been apologizing for 18 months, to your cousin, to your household, to the trustees who will not come to your house, to the man in Gracechurch Street, to me. You are blind, Your Grace. You are not the one who has wronged anyone. Tell me what you intend to do." He was very still.
"Mrs. Whitcombe, tell me."
"I intend," he said slowly, "to call the trustees myself, tomorrow morning, before Gregory does. I intend to call them to this house, into this library, at noon. I intend to have Mr. Falconer present, and Lady Eustacia, and you. I intend to lay before them the document Mr. Falconer brought, the column of figures you have just read, and the testimony of the second footman, the housekeeper, and the head groom, all of whom I have reason to believe will speak. I intend to ask the trustees, in front of my cousin, whether they consider me competent to dismiss him from this house. And when they say I am, I intend to dismiss him from this house." "Yes, Your Grace." "Mrs. Whitcombe." "Yes." "You knelt by my chair." "I did." "Why?" I had no answer for him. The truth was that I had knelt because I had wanted to be at the height of his face, so that when he turned toward my voice, he was not looking down at where he thought I was. And the larger truth was that I had wanted to be near him. And the larger truth still was that I had wanted, for the first time in 7 years of widowhood, to put my hand somewhere a man could feel it. None of these things could be said. "Because you are a man, Your Grace, who has not been spoken to face in a year and a half." He was silent. "Mrs. Whitcombe." "Your Grace." "Give me your hand." I gave him my hand. He took it. He did not raise it. He did not kiss it. He held it, on the arm of the chair, in his own, and he turned his face toward where my face was, and we stayed like that, for 10 seconds, for 20, for an interval of time I have never been able to measure. And Lady Eustacia in the corner of the drawing-room did not look up from her tapestry, and the clock on the mantelpiece struck 9.
He released my hand. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow, Your Grace."
I went to bed in the room he had given me on the 2nd floor of the house in Berkeley Square. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and thought of my husband, dead 19 months at Quatre Bras, and of my sister in Kent, and of Lottie, asleep in the small room beside mine, for Lady Eustacia had insisted, on the first day, that the child come too, and of the column of figures, and of the Duke's hand on mine. I thought, I am going to lose this post tomorrow. The trustees will side with the cousin. I will be turned out of this house by noon, and Lottie with me, and I will go back to Cheapside on £80 a year. And I would have done one useful thing in my life, which is to have told the Duke of Ashworth to stop apologizing for being blind. It would have been, I told myself, enough. It was not what happened. What happened was that Mr. Gregory Ashworth moved first. He moved at 5:30 in the morning. I know because the second footman,
The Whitechapel man, whose name I had learned was Thomas Reed, came up the back stair and knocked on my door and told me, in a low voice, that Mr. Ashworth had taken a horse from the mews at 5, and that he had told the head groom he was going to Lincoln's Inn, and that the head groom, who had not, for 14 months, been required to give an account of Mr. Ashworth's movements to any person, had asked me to be informed. I rose. I dressed. I went to the Duke's library at 6. The Duke was already there. He was sitting in his chair by the cold grate, fully dressed, the watch in his hand, and I understood from the angle of his head as I came in that he had been awake all night.
Mrs. Whitcombe? Your Grace, your cousin has gone to Lincoln's Inn.
To Mr. Falconer?
I believe so, your Grace.
To accuse Mr. Falconer of imposing on me?
Yes.
To bring Mr. Falconer before the trustees as a man who has insinuated himself into a blind man's household for the purpose of plunder?
Yes, your Grace.
It is a clever move.
It is.
It is, I think, too clever. He rose. He turned his face toward where my voice had been.
Mrs. Whitcombe, will you do something for me?
Yes?
Will you call upon the trustees yourself, this morning, before Gregory reaches Mr. Falconer? There are 3 of them. The first is Lord Carlisle of Grosvenor Square. The second is Sir John Pelham of Half Moon Street. The third is the Bishop of Durham, who is in town and lodged at his sister's house in Cavendish Square. They are all of them within a half hour of this house. Will you go to each of them and tell each of them, in your own words, in your own person, that the Duke of Ashworth requests their presence at 12 o'clock in his library on a matter of household consequence, and that I am sending Mr. Falconer to fetch them myself, in 3 carriages I have already arranged. Will you go now? Your Grace, Mrs. Whitcombe. They will not receive me. They will receive Lady Eustacia Marchmont. She is coming with you. She is dressed. She has been awake since 5. She has known what was coming for 3 days. I did not say I love you then, because I did not yet know that I did, and I did not say it for several months after. But I have wondered since whether the wave of feeling that went through me in the Duke's library at 6 in the morning of the 20th of November, 1816, the understanding that this man, who could not see, had been moving his pieces in the dark for 3 days while I thought I was protecting him, was the moment I would have called it love if I had had the courage to use the word. I went to the trustees with Lady Eustacia. We took them in the order the Duke had named them. Lord Carlisle was at his breakfast and rose from it. Sir John Pelham was in his dressing room and came down in shirt sleeves. The Bishop of Durham, who had been the Duke's tutor at Oxford and had not seen him since June of 1815, heard Lady Eustacia out for 30 seconds and put on his coat himself. All 3 of them were in the Duke's library by 11:45. Mr. Falconer arrived at 5 minutes to. Mr. Gregory Ashworth, who had ridden to Lincoln's Inn and found Mr. Falconer's clerk, and been told by the clerk, with great composure, that Mr. Falconer was unfortunately engaged this morning at the house of the Duke of Ashworth, arrived at 12 precisely, having ridden back through London in a state I did not witness but can imagine, and walked into his cousin's library to find 3 trustees, a man of business, a chaperone of unimpeachable reputation, a bishop, and the woman he had told the Duke was an impostor. All of them seated, and the books, his own books, from his locked study, brought down by the second footman with the key he had taken from Mr. Ashworth's coat at 6 o'clock that morning, open on the table. The Duke rose. Gregory. Adrian. Sit down, Gregory. He sat. What followed was the scene I will remember for the rest of my life. Not for its substance, though its substance was material, but for its conduct. The Duke of Ashworth, who could not see, presided over a meeting of his trustees in his own library on the question of his own competence. And he did it from his own chair, with his father's watch in his hand. And he did it without raising his voice once. He had Mr. Falconer read the column of figures. He had the second footman testify. He had the housekeeper, a woman who had served his mother for 30 years and his cousin for 18 months, and disliked the latter, describe, with composure, what she had been required to record in the household ledger, and what she had been required to omit. He had Lady Eustacia confirm what she had heard in the drawing-room the evening before. And then, at the end, when Mr. Gregory Ashworth, pale as I have ever seen a man, opened his mouth to speak, the Duke held up his hand.
Gregory. Adrian. Gregory, I am going to ask you one question, and I am going to ask you to answer it in front of these men. Do you wish to give an account of the £6,200, or do you wish to leave this house by 3 o'clock this afternoon and never re-enter it? There was a silence. Adrian, said Gregory Ashworth, I choose, Gregory. There was a longer silence. I will leave, he said, by 3 o'clock. By 3 o'clock. And the £6,200 will be restored to the estate within the calendar year, or Mr. Falconer will pursue you for it in Chancery. Adrian. Within the calendar year, Gregory. Yes. Lord Carlisle, Sir John, Your Grace. This last to the bishop, who inclined his head. I thank you. I will not detain you further. Mrs. Whitcombe, would you be so good as to see the gentlemen out? I saw them out. The Bishop of Durham, in the hall, put his hand on my arm.
Mrs. Whitcombe, Your Grace. How long has Adrian been blind? 18 months, Your Grace. And how long have you been in his house? 12 days, Your Grace. The bishop nodded slowly. Mrs. Whitcombe, he has been my godson for 30 years. I have not seen him out of a chair since June of 1815. He stood today. He stood for an hour. I do not know what you have done, but I know that you have done it, and I shall be glad to have your acquaintance for the rest of your life. He went out. I closed the door behind him. I stood in the marble vestibule of the house in Berkeley Square, the same vestibule in which Mr. Gregory Ashworth had warned me away 11 days before, and I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, and I cried. For the first time, for the only time, in the whole of the 12 days, without sound and without choosing to. A hand touched my shoulder. Mrs. Whitcombe. I turned. The Duke was in the vestibule. He had come out of the library by himself, the way a man comes out of a room he has known for 30 years, his hand trailing along the wall. Your Grace. You are weeping. Yes, Your Grace. Why? I do not know, Your Grace. He raised his hand. He raised it slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who could not see what he was reaching for. And he found my face, the side of my face, the wet place under my eye. And he held it there, his palm flat against my cheek, in the marble vestibule of his own house, in full view of any servant who came around the corner of the corridor, with the door to the library still open behind him, and the hall clock striking 1 in the afternoon of the 20th of November, 1816. And he said, Caroline. I had not heard my own first name in the mouth of any man since 1815. I covered his hand with mine. We did not kiss in the vestibule. That came later.
We did not, in fact, speak again for several minutes. We stood in the marble hall, with his hand on my face and my hand on his hand. And the second footman, Thomas Reed of Whitechapel, who I would in the years to come stand godmother to his eldest daughter, came around the corner of the corridor and saw us, and went back the way he had come without breaking stride. And Lady Eustacia in the library coughed once and did not come out. And somewhere in the upper part of the house, Lottie was singing. It was Lottie in the end who broke the moment. She came down the great staircase in her brown wool coat with a piece of toast in her hand. And she stopped on the landing when she saw us, and she said very clearly, "Sir." The Duke did not move his hand from my face. "Lottie," he said. "Sir, are you all right?" "I am all right, Lottie." "Is Aunt Caroline all right?" "Yes, Lottie." "Are you going to marry her?" There was a silence in the hall. "Lottie," I said.
"I think he should," Lottie said, and continued down the staircase with her toast. The Duke laughed. He laughed properly. The laugh I had not yet heard. The laugh I would in the years to come hear in our own drawing room, and in our garden at Ashworth Place, and in the upper rooms of the house in Berkeley Square at 3 in the morning. The laugh that made me understand that the dry laugh in the hackney had been the laugh of a man who'd forgotten he could laugh any other way. And he turned his face toward where I stood, and he said, "Caroline." "Yes?" "The child has a point." "She is 6, Your Grace." "She is wiser than her aunt." "She is wiser than her aunt's employer." "Caroline." "Yes?" "Will you marry me?" "I am in mourning, Your Grace." "You are 19 months a widow, Caroline. Black has been an honest dress, and it has been my whole world, and I will not have it a moment longer than you owe it." "You cannot see what I am wearing." "I do not need to. I know what you have worn since the day I met you, and I know what colour suits the voice that has read to me in this house. And I know that I am asking you in a hall with a child on the staircase and a chaperone behind a door, and a bishop in a carriage in the square. And I am asking you because I have not, in my life, found a thing I wanted more than your hand on my hand, and a child of mine on the stair. And if you say no, I will accept it, and if you say yes, I will arrange the license this afternoon. Your Grace. Adrian. Adrian. Yes. Yes. He did not move for a long moment, and then he made a sound that I have never been able to name, and he stepped forward into me, into the space where I had been standing, and he put his other hand on the other side of my face, both of his hands on me, in the vestibule, and he kissed me. It was not a careful kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had not kissed a woman in 2 years, and had thought he never would again. And it was the kiss of a man whose hands had been counting the rooms of his own house for 18 months by touch, and now were touching for the first time a thing he had chosen. And the marble of the vestibule was cold against my back where I leaned into the door, and his thumb was at the hinge of my jaw, and Lottie on the staircase had the very great sense to turn round and walk back up. The license was procured that afternoon. The Duke himself was driven to Doctors' Commons. Mr. Falconer accompanied him. The Bishop of Durham, who had not yet left for his sister's house in Cavendish Square, performed the ceremony at 6 o'clock in the evening in the drawing-room at Berkeley Square, with Lady Eustacia and the second footman as witnesses, and Lottie on the hearthrug with her hands folded. I wore a grey wool gown. I had nothing else.
The Duke wore his father's watch.
The bishop said the words. The Duke said, "I will, and I do," and turned his face toward me without hesitation, the way a man turns his face toward a thing he can see, and put the ring, his mother's ring, sent for from the bank at 4 in the afternoon, on my finger. Gregory Ashworth was gone by 3, as agreed. He went to Lisbon, where the climate suited him, and where, in 1819, he married a Portuguese widow of moderate fortune, who, I am told, ran the household. The £6,200 was restored to the estate by November of 1817, in instalments, the last of which was a banker's draft Mr. Falconer placed in my hand at breakfast, and which I gave to Lottie to deliver to the Duke across the table. The Duke received it gravely. The Duke said, "Thank you, Lottie." Lottie said, "You are welcome, uncle." We removed to Ashworth Place in Buckinghamshire in the spring of 1817. My sister, whose decline had been slower than the doctors had thought, lived to see Lottie come to her in a green silk dress in the gardens of Ashworth Place in May. She died in June, and Lottie became, in fact and in law, our daughter. By deed of guardianship, the Duke had drawn up himself, with Mr. Falconer's assistance, the week of the wedding. Our first child of our own, a daughter named Eleanor for my mother, was born in February of 1818. Our son, the present Marquess of Hartwell, was born in 1820. I have, over the course of 9 years, learned to read aloud well enough to satisfy my husband, who has very particular taste in prose, and who has, by an excellent surgeon in Edinburgh, in the autumn of 1823, recovered the partial sight of his left eye, enough to see the outline of my face in good light, and to read large print with a glass. He has not, in the 7 years since, asked once to be told what he is missing. He says that he saw what he needed to see in November of 1816, in a marble vestibule, with his hand on my face and a small child on the staircase, and that the rest is good fortune. His father's silver watch, with the raised compass face on the back, he gave to Lottie on her 16th birthday. She wears it on a chain at her own waistcoat. She has been at school in Bath, where they are not certain what to do with a young woman who reads Greek and quotes Mr. Falconer's contracts. And she carries it, she tells me, because her uncle has not needed a compass since November of 1816, and because, she says, she likes to know which way is north. The fog over the rooftops of Berkeley Square in November is the colour of pewter still. I see it from the window of the room I share with the Duke, in the house we keep there for the season, on the mornings when the light is grey and the river is in. I do not think of Gracechurch Street often. I do not need to. The man who walked into the fog that afternoon walks out of it now beside me, his hand on the small of my back in the corridor, his other hand on the wall. For the eye is partial, and the corridors are dim, and old habits are kind. And we go down to breakfast together with our children, and a small girl who is no longer small says, "Good morning, Papa," and the Duke of Ashworth says, "Good morning, Lottie," and the day begins. I have him. I have got him. I have got him still.